What is up, Earth's mightiest subscribers? It's Blerd without fear. Welcome back to the channel. Today's video, we're going to be talking about Static Shadows of Dakota number 7, written by Nicholas Draper Ivey and Vita Ayala, with art also by Nicholas Draper Ivey. So Static and Ebon are working together in the conclusion of the Shadows of Dakota story arc. What could possibly go wrong? Well, nothing. As it turns out, Ebon and Static, despite the fact that they've had a bit of beef over the course of the past few issues, they actually work surprisingly well together. And honestly, I don't even want to say surprisingly, because technically I feel like the way that Vita and Nicholas were setting all this up, it was a better version of what I feel the Static Shock television series tried to do. In that animated series, Ebon was such a one-note character. And I know a lot of people liked him as a character, and while I don't really have any nostalgia for him as a character then, at least not in the way other people do, I saw that there were still crumbs of something good there. But you gotta admit, and I don't care how much you love that animated series, if you go back and watch it, Ebon is very much, I would dare say, probably just a nut hair shy of being a mustache twirling villain. Here, he has depth, he has nuance, and I feel like the Ebon here, it makes way more sense for him to work with Static in the way that he does in this issue than it ever would have meant for Static and Ebon working together on that animated series. It makes way more sense here, and it's handled way more effectively in my opinion. They work well together because their powers, while they technically override one another, they also complement one another at the same time, and they both need each other. We've seen in previous issues where Ebon tried to infiltrate the secret lab where his brother Adam Evans has been held in what is effectively a torture scenario where he's, for all intents and purposes, being milked. And while Ebon is powerful, he is incapable of breaching that facility because they knew he would one day come to try and save his brother. So they built the facility specifically to negate his powers, hence why he needed Static's help in the first place. And because of the massive amounts of energy that this lab requires to keep Ebon out, it's perfect for Static because he can literally leech off the energy that they're putting out. It's all electricity. And they are effective in taking down what is technically the big bad, the secret big bad that has been looming in the shadows all this time, which we'll talk about here in just a moment. But before we move on to that, I do want to say real quick that despite all of the stuff I just said, all of Static and Ebon working together and being two sides of the same coin, what I like about this is that Nicholas and Vita leave the door open. They crack it open just a little bit so that whoever comes in after, whether Vita takes over writing duties of Static again or someone else comes in and takes over writing duties of Static, because for those who do not know, Nicholas Draper Ivey has announced that this is his final issue of Static. He is done writing Static. He is moving on to his own personal projects, all of which I am very curious to see what he's gonna do. He's a really cool cat, and having interacted with him over on Twitter, I'm not calling it X, but having interacted with him on Twitter, he's a cool dude who has a good head on his shoulders, and I like his art style, and I really want to see what he's capable of doing, because he has implied that he has stuff that he's just had sitting on the back burner, but he has not had time to do it because, well, he's been doing this. So now he gets to go do that. And once again, we don't know who takes over Static after this. It's up in the air at this point. But both he and Vita leave the door open that if someone comes in after and starts writing Static, that we don't know where Ebon's going to fall. It's heavily implied that Ebon might come after Static the next time that we see him. Ebon basically says that, I'm gonna let you slide for now, but next time we meet, it might not be on such friendly terms. But what I'm kind of hoping for is that maybe they remain ambiguous with one another. Like, I would love it if they remained allies, even if it was like on kind of like a Goku Vegeta level where maybe they don't still like each other, or at least if they do, it's very one-sided, but they're not bitter enemies by any stretch of the imagination. They're more like rivals. That's what I would like to see going forward. I don't really want to see Ebon dive back into being a villain. I would rather they just be two guys who are working on the same side to do what's right, but one is just more extreme than the other. Like, once again, it's kind of going back to the dynamic I talked about before, the Charles Xavier Magneto dynamic, the Dr. King Malcolm X dynamic. It's not to say that either of those characters is not capable of doing something that the other would normally be considered. Like, I always like to use Dr. King and Malcolm X. A lot of people like to believe that Dr. King was 100% non-violent. That's actually not true. A lot of people tend to forget that, and I blame white conservatives for this, but a lot of people tend to forget that Dr. King was about that business too. It's just that he felt it wasn't and shouldn't be your first option. Violence should not be your first option. It's not to say that he was just 100% non-violent. I think that's a gross oversimplification of who Dr. King was. All that said, I kind of feel like that's Static. Even Static says in this issue that he talks about the difference between vengeance and justice, and that vengeance is just harming people because they harmed you. That's what vengeance is. There's no actual justice in that. And he says that in justice, it's not to say there's no violence, but that violence is typically less extreme and ultimately is meant to serve a certain goal. It's basically Nicholas and Vita letting you know that this is the difference between Ebon and Static. Once all the dust is settled, all the smoke is cleared, whether Ebon returns and is a villain or an ally or a rival or maybe a little bit of all three, whatever, that is what remains to be seen. But if it's up to me, and once again, I don't write for Milestone. I'm not a creative there. I only talk to them, in passing at best. But I'm putting this out there because I know that Nicholas and Vita, I know they watch my videos. I know that Dennis Cowan and Reggie Hudlin, I know that they are at least vaguely aware of who I am. I will put this out here, and I'm just saying this, if you ever, hey, holla at your boy. Holla at your boy, I got ideas. If I was the one who came in and took over Static after this, I would literally have Ebon return as a rival, someone who they can talk that smack with each other, they can get into each other's faces, but at the end of the day, they are always going to help one another. And Ebon will always be the cooler of the two. That's just, the nature of how this is. He's always going to be the one calling Static playboy and, hero and all this other stuff. He's going to be the guy that's going to talk that ish. But at the end of the day, Ebon's going to do what's right. And, he might do it his own way. You know what I'm saying? I wouldn't have him go back to being a villain. I honestly don't think he would be a good villain. Don't get me wrong. But I don't think he should go back to that. I feel like this is a time to evolve Ebon to something better. Getting back to who is the real true villain in all this, Dr. Fallon Lennox. Now, if this character does not sound familiar, this is a character we were introduced to in Static Shadows of Dakota #1. It's probably the one shortcoming of the story that I'll throw out there, is that I kind of wish we had a little more time to get to know this character before she is ultimately revealed, but because of the nature of how she was revealed, there honestly was no better way to do this. What I'm talking about is hindsight, is 2020 vision type stuff. This isn't me shitting on Vita or Nicholas for doing it the way they did either. I want to make sure that's clear. It's just that, I almost wish we would have maybe gotten a little bit more of a reveal about her sooner, because I feel like everything kind of had to be thrown together at the last minute. It's kind of the criticism I had about Blue Beetle that I've talked about on the channel before. And I'll try and remember to link the actual stream where I talked about it. But for those who don't know, I do a live stream every Saturday at 1 p.m. Eastern, 10 a.m. Pacific. And we also have them on Thursdays as well. So make sure you tune in, make sure you tap that subscribe button and hit that notification bell. That way you don't miss out on anything. But one of the things I talked about in that video was I talked about the character Conrad Carapax and how, for the most part, he is set up as a villain for the movie. And then later on, spoiler for Blue Beetle if you haven't seen it, but towards the end of the movie, and literally like in the last 10 or 15 minutes, I felt like we just got a huge info dump of who the character was. And it's supposed to change how you feel about the character. But ultimately, I feel like that fell flat. And while this didn't feel exactly the same as that, I feel like, man, I wish we would just gotten a little bit of this information maybe in the previous issue or maybe an issue prior to that, because we just get this huge info dump of who she is and why she's the way she is. And granted, it's all compelling stuff and it makes sense because she is a woman who grew up having lost her mother at an early age, and she was the bright shining beacon of light and hope in her life, and all she had left was her overbearing father, who basically browbeat her to becoming a cruel and unethical man. As he is, she became the exact same thing. She became cruel and unethical. And even though she had great ideas, she went about them the wrong way. Like one of her chief ideas is learning how to copy the human brain, the human psyche down into a computer format, effectively preserving someone's memory, their essence in digital format. I would be interested in, that being a thing. It just, all that kind of ghost in the shell level technologies has always been of interest to me. Just how she goes about doing it. It's how she does these things. And once you realize who she is, that she was originally the teacher of the young character Quincy, who was killed off just 2 or 3 issues prior, you realize, oh, this woman is terrible. She's a bad person. On top of the fact that she's torturing Ebon's brother, Adam Evans. It's like, oh yeah, this woman, she's a whole problem. And it's like, oh, and she kills kids too, even kids who she had a connection to. And you realize she has no empathy, no regret whatsoever in destroying Quincy for the sake of science. It's just insane. And I was like, man, this villain deserved a little bit more time to cook, even if it was only like 1 more issue. Man, and once again, like I said, this is all hindsight, it's 2020 vision type stuff right here. I'm willing to gamble that it's something that every creative encounters. And I've seen creatives talk about it in the past. I've seen people as great as Chris Claremont go back and say, man, I probably could have done that differently. That said, Dr. Linux is not really the major problem for this comic right now. However, she will be a problem later, because as we get in a panel later, we do know that she's not been arrested permanently. She's not going to get her day in court. She is going to be taken out of the criminal justice system by Dr. Edwin Alva. Dr. Edwin Alva, if you're not familiar with who this character is, he has long been a thorn in the side of Hardware, another hero in the Milestone Dakotaverse, and is also a character who was the antagonist, the chief antagonist for Hardware back in the original OG run of Milestone's Dakotaverse. So yeah, this is a character who here they're actually getting to the point you see Milestone is building Alva up to be, I guess, the centralized big bad of their universe, because we've seen him over on the Hardware side of things. He is directly responsible for Hardware even being who he is in the first place, having practically raised Hardware from a young age, taking him under his wing, ensuring that he had all the best schooling and learning and had all the means to create the greatest tech in the world, which was not out of any sense of altruism, but was all in an effort to secure the bag. And now you see over in the Icon and Rocket side of things that he is responsible in a lot of ways for what's going on with them right now. After they had taken down the entire world's drug trade, he's one of the chief faces responsible for all the villains that have been coming after them as of late, and also is responsible for the new, what I guess you could call an organization of sorts, system that is going after everyone. And we see system brought up once again in this. And what we learn is that Dr. Linux is like how Curtis Metcalf, aka Hardware, was a protege of Alva, so too was Dr. Linux. So it kind of helps explain how all this stuff is connected, and Alva busting her out of jail and all this other stuff. I feel like whatever they have cooking, especially with the shadow cabinet on the horizon, I feel like Edwin Alva is going to start coming more and more into the forefront here. And this was basically a way of letting you know that he's not just showing up in Hardware books, he's showing up everywhere. So the next time we see him, he will be going up against the 4 pillars of the Dakotaverse, those being Icon, Rocket, Hardware, and Static. If you enjoyed this video and you want to see more of my videos breaking down Milestone Media comics like Static and Icon, Rocket, Hardware, as well as other comics from Marvel and DC, make sure you hit that subscribe button and tap that notification bell so that way you don't miss anything. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video, and until next time, let me know what you thought about Static, Shadows of Dakota #7, and the series as a whole. Keep it plus ultra and sound off in the comments.